So I have a few announcements.
Okay.
So we want to welcome you all tonight to our Virtually Unstoppable OTA 2020 virtual conference. We are glad that you're all here and excited to offer this presentation to you tonight. Before we begin, we do have a few housekeeping items. So all participant lines are going to be muted during the presentation. And during the presentation, we will not be monitoring the chat box. Instead, please use the Q&A box to ask any questions that may arise during the presentation, and then the moderators will sort through those and allow the presenter time at the end to answer each of those questions. And then at the close of the session, you will be given 2 separate links to a Google form. They're separated by last name, so last names A through L and then M through Z. Please use your appropriate link for your last name. And then this form will be completed in order for you to receive your continuing education certificate for participation. And please make sure that your email address is correct on the form so that it does go to your email box. And then remember to get comfortable and enjoy the presentation. And so now I would like to introduce the presenters. We've got Stacia and Erica.
Erica, do you want to go first? You can tell everyone who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Erica Kemp. I am the current capstone coordinator at The Ohio State University. I'm the prior fieldwork coordinator and currently covering fieldwork because our new fieldwork coordinator is on maternity leave. That's Allie Williams, if you've heard her name.
All right, and I'm Stacia Gailey, the academic fieldwork coordinator at Xavier University. And I'm giving Erica props that she's doing both roles right now because that is absolutely crazy of doing fieldwork and capstone in the middle of COVID. So
it's been fun.
Making it work. And so originally Allie was going to be a part of this, but she gets to hang out with her baby at home right now. So it's Erica and I. And so what really kind of drew us to this as I kind of opened my screen share is the change over from the old fieldwork performance eval to the new one. We really just wanted to kind of touch base with those of you that are either academic fieldwork coordinators or fieldwork educators or even fieldwork coordinators, and then potentially even some students of just looking at the new fieldwork performance eval, what that entails, and then mainly going through the differences and the new rating and just making sure everyone's on the same page before we kind of roll this out. So I know at Xavier, our current students are out on level 2 and we are not changing over into the current cohort. So we're not changing like right in the middle of level 2 for our students. However, come January, when we kind of start the new cohort in 2021, we will have this new fieldwork performance evaluation for those fieldwork educators. So we anticipate, both Erica and I had talked about this prior, of anticipating doing this again for fieldwork educators that are specifically with our students. And so those of you that are out there that are academic fieldwork coordinators, you know, this is going to be available to use for all of the state of Ohio for you academic fieldwork coordinators. So feel free to be able to educate all the fieldwork educators that you have out there. But and I know, Erica, you're similar probably.
Yeah, we have students out right now as well on the old version of the fieldwork performance eval, and we are starting in January. The tool was available as of September 1, so there are some schools that started with this new version now in the fall. So you'll just kind of have to check in with whatever school you're working with to see which one's being used in the fall. As of January, pretty much everyone will be on this new version.
Right. So some of the objectives that we were hoping that you get from tonight are just introducing the new fieldwork performance eval, and then there are 2. There's a new OT and an OTA student eval, just explaining the differences between both of them. And then also looking at that rating scale and scoring, because again, it is different. The scoring, sorry, I'm going to turn off my email right now. I see that it's coming through.
The never-ending stream of email as a fieldwork coordinator.
So, there we go. So being able to look at that rating scale, because it is a bit different in how they quantify those, just being able to provide you information on why it's an evidence-based, reliable, and valid evaluation tool right now versus the old version. And then we're going to look at a couple case studies, hopefully if we have time at the end, looking at those case studies for you to be able to kind of get an idea of rating and what that looks like within the new system. And then of course, taking time for questions at the end if you guys have any. All right, so the purpose of the evaluating a student during fieldwork, as hopefully all of you are aware that there is a requirement. So if you look down there at that ACOT 2018 standard, that as a university, we are required to have some type of evaluation mechanism for evaluating supervision of students. So for us at Xavier, and I know at Ohio State and many different universities, we look and use the fieldwork performance evaluation for level 2. So we're also looking at the accreditation standard as being able to provide the supervision skills to you as a fieldwork educator, being able to provide you continuing education opportunities, different articles, so evidence-based articles, a workshop like this one. You know, most of us do some type of yearly workshop for our fieldwork educators. So all of that is required for accreditation to make sure that you feel competent and skilled to be able to take a student. But just overall, being able to provide a student with that accurate assessment, because of course we want them to be entry level before they start in a job and before they work alongside of you. So making sure that they are competent and entry level in that particular setting in which you are working in. And then number 2, providing opportunities for students to perform a self-assessment. So they're encouraged to, you know, our students are encouraged to complete that self-evaluation. So do the fieldwork performance about midterm on themselves and at final, and kind of comparing and contrasting to their own view of how they're doing with how you feel like that they are doing as well. So just really looking at, are they an active participant in that learning process? And self-assessments are always a really nice way to look at that and see if, is that student thinking they're doing the same thing that you think they're doing? And then just being able to provide feedback to students. So as therapists, we should be providing feedback throughout anyway. So whether it's constructive, positive, verbal, nonverbal, just making sure all of those are kind of congruent and how you're providing feedback to the students. So that's really why the fieldwork performance evaluation is even there and the purpose of it. So looking at just a duty of the fieldwork educator, of really kind of breaking it down of why as a fieldwork educator, you do what you do when you do have a student. So there's some clear performance expectations that are required before a student even comes to you. So there's the AOTA fieldwork data form that typically the fieldwork coordinator, not the fieldwork educator, so the person that's coordinating all the fieldwork at the place that you work is sending them to the university. So I know at Xavier, we keep all of this into our database system, which we use Exact for at Xavier, and we compile all of these AOTA data forms. We compile weekly objectives. We compile the site-specific objectives under your specific name of the setting in which you work and the hospital or the clinic or the rehab facility or all of the different settings and sites that we use. So students have access to that before they even come to you. So the AOTA data form allows a student to review that placement, that level 2 placement, before they're even beginning, to know what's expected before they come, what kind of particular ages of clients are they going to see there, what's the typical day look like, and then just looking at those weekly objectives and site-specific objectives as well. So for any of you that are fieldwork educators out there, you know, that's why we're asking for those things, because we really want to make sure that students are prepared before they're coming to you, that they know not only what they're getting themselves into, but they're also really kind of getting excited about what other students have done there and really looking at, what do I need to really brush up on, or what do I need to make sure that I am really knowledgeable about before I come into that particular setting. Another duty is just collaborating with the student. So this typically occurs either in weekly meetings, or it could be informal, like you're with that student throughout the day anyway. So you're kind of talking to them about, this is what's going well, this is what's not going so well, what can you do to change that? Some places have a specific weekly meeting time where they're reviewing like strengths, weaknesses, setting goals for each week. So places do it differently. And again, it's really up to the site. Just being able to prepare students for challenging situations. So the students should feel challenged. And I tell my students this constantly, of if you think it's a piece of cake, then you're probably doing something wrong as a student. because you should feel challenged. And if you're not being challenged, you're not learning. And so really you as the fieldwork educator are going to be able to assist them in preparing for that challenge, and really what is their optimal performance. And so when I talk to students about, like, hopefully by, we have level 2 students that are in an OT program. So it's usually like week, I'd say 9, 10, 11, that they, that they're starting to feel like, oh, I could do this. Like I'm in the hang of things. And then boom, hopefully that fieldwork educator is really kind of challenging them further, of like really looking at that critical thinking, how to process through. So again, just really being able to challenge those students. So then you're also providing them with prompt, direct, specific, constructive feedback. So thinking about what you can do as a fieldwork educator that can either help, or what are you doing maybe that's hindering that feedback. So it's best to be able to provide feedback in the moment. So directly after something has happened, or, if you're in there with a client, it's not appropriate at that time, directly following that, and really asking, what went well, why did that go well, what could be done different. And if the student doesn't pick up on that, again, you're helping them figure that out. So hopefully they're at that point, by midterm at least, that they're starting to figure out, why didn't that go so well? What can I do to change it? How can I make that be a better session next time? And then the 6th thing here, making specific suggestions to the student in their performance, using verbal, nonverbal, written communication effectively. So as a fieldwork educator, being able to provide, again, being congruent with all of that. So, if I'm talking to a student and I'm telling them what went well, but then the next time I'm leading the session and I'm changing what they did before, and then I'm saying, oh, remember, like, ooh, this wasn't that great. But if I just told them it went well, just again, being congruent, or really matching those nonverbals with verbals. We practice a lot of this and role play that with students, of really, are your nonverbals matching what you're really saying? So, if I'm standing there looking like I'm bored out of my mind, but it's really maybe my brain just in overdrive trying to think, how is your nonverbal coming across? And then number 8, I'd say is probably one of the most challenging, is this conflict management. So being able to involve yourself, being able to raise areas of concern, and that's really where those academic fieldwork coordinators come into play often. Are there areas of concern, making sure that we're involved in that. And again, as academic fieldwork coordinators, making sure that we're providing that to our fieldwork educators, of making sure they're not feeling out there, on a cliff all alone with our student that might be struggling, or maybe just really doing really well. And we also, as academic fieldwork coordinators, would love to hear that, because oftentimes we're hearing about all this, the struggles and what's a challenge. But sometimes we'll get an email like, oh, your student's doing really well, thank you for sending them to me. And that's always just like, that just gets chalked up into my emails of like, that I love to get. And it's so helpful to have sometimes when we're dealing with a lot of conflict. Also using a variety of approaches to facilitate the student performance. Thinking about how you respond to feedback yourself, and how you respond to areas of concern yourself. So what is your own communication style? What is your own personality? And how is that matched with your students, with fieldwork educators, and students? Sometimes you're not a good fit together as a communication style and a personality. We talk to students a lot and that's okay, because you work with many different personalities, you work with many different people on a daily basis, and it doesn't necessarily matter that that person's your friend, right? That person doesn't need to be your friend as a fieldwork educator. They need to be able to teach you. And so from your end as a fieldwork educator and as an academic fieldwork coordinator, of just making sure that that's known ahead of time, of like, being aware, I think, of your own style.
And we tell our students that as they get ready for fieldwork, they're going to enter into one of the most intimate relationships they've ever had, because you don't even really spend 40 hours a week with your significant other. You're gone at work that much. And so I think that this idea of communication and personality and having this open relationship, it's taxing, right? Both on the educator and the student. So it is just something to think about, the pressure on both sides, and that we are here to support you.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece of knowing that we're there to support you when you need it as a fieldwork educator or fieldwork coordinator that's out there, and for the student, you know, that the student should feel support from both sides as well. And yeah, similarly, Erica, we talked to students about that. And I think it's important as a fieldwork educator to know that, you know, you're not spending that much time with your family. And, you know, if I spent 40 hours a week nonstop with some members of my family, even, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose it. Sometimes it's okay to have a break. And sometimes it's okay to have your student you know, take a break. And maybe they're in a different setting that day. Maybe they're, you know, I've had some students that are like really interested in a specific setting that's not appropriate for level 2. So if they're like wanting to see surgery, or they're wanting to do like intense in the NICU. So if they're doing well with you and doing and competent already in that setting, those are really nice kind of to be able to allow the student to take a day to be able to see those types of settings, but it is a break, right? And not 40 hours a week with the student, and that's okay. Serving as a role model for professional behavior, that's a big one. You know, talking with other sites in terms of like what's required of you as a fieldwork educator, you know, what's required of your specific setting, and are you following those rules when you have a student? You know, if the rule at your setting is that cell phones aren't out, and then the student is seeing that your cell phone is out all the time, or you're texting, or you're taking personal phone calls. And again, that's just really kind of looking at, am I a role model for professional behavior for that student? Collaborating with the student and us as academic field educators or academic field coordinators to really, again, identify learning needs. If you're needing assistance, if you're just like, hey, the student's amazing, I want all your Xavier level 2 students, please let me know, you know, those types of things. So just really collaborating with us and letting us know this worked really well. Or, you know, we've even gotten some sites where they're like, hey, I really need this student to come for level 1 here prior to coming for level 2. So they get more of the kind of back end stuff done and already kind of have a leg up. Then when they come for level 2 of, hey, they already know where all the supplies are kept. They already know where the patient's rooms are. They already know how to find me. So it's kind of like having this kind of sequential step that some places require, and some don't, some do. So again, just really talking to the academic fieldwork coordinators and letting us know ahead of time of what would be nice for you as a fieldwork educator to have. All right, Erica, take it away.
All right, so we're going to talk about the current fieldwork performance evaluation. And as Stacia already talked about, the purpose of the tool really is to evaluate entry-level competence of both OT and OTA students. The other second purpose is to provide midterm feedback and assist students in getting to that developing competent performance. So you may be asking, why did they redo these? Aren't these other ones just fine? Oh my gosh, I have to learn something new. But the reality is that it was really good that they did this, and I wasn't convinced initially. But they did it to better align the items on the FWPE with current practice in healthcare, as well as with education and just society in general. And they also did this to address feedback from stakeholders, including educators, students, and fieldwork coordinators, and to address some known issues that we had with the tool. Stacey's in control of the slides. So the current FWP that you've been using was developed and validated in 2002 for level 2 fieldwork. And those replaced ones that had been done in the 80s. So the OTA was made in 1983 prior to that, and the OT in 1987. Some of the difficulties with the prior ones too was that the OTA fieldwork evaluation tool had not been revised or evaluated since 1983. So the one that we're working with hasn't really been looked at since 1983. And the fieldwork evaluation tool had limited studies establishing validity of the 87 tool. And then the other thing that we saw is that the items in the current 2002 version did not reflect any changes in practice from 1983 to 2002. And if you think about, we've come a really long way since 1983 to 2002, one being our shift back to occupation, right? And so our current FWPE did not really show that very well. Next slide. So what did they do? From the 1980s to 2002, they already had clarified and reduced the number of items. One thing that they did not used to have was a midterm and final cutoff score. So you guys are familiar with the current tool. We do have that right now. They added formative and summative evaluations. So the idea of a midterm kind of summary of how are you doing, and then formative is like, where do we need to go, right, from here? How do we form what you're going to do? The rating scale changed from 5-point to 4-point. So those of you that went to school, prior to 2002, remember having a 5-point scale on your fieldwork tool. And it was designated that students who do not meet standards on all items related to ethics and safety would not pass the fieldwork rotation. So that was new in 2002. The difficulty is that there is no record of additional validation studies on the tools since the pilot draft versions in 2002. And the assigned cutoff scores that they added were actually never validated. And so this caused a lot of difficulties when students weren't hitting a certain score, when there weren't any studies to show that that was a score that showed competence. Especially as we've moved to a competency-based type of education, all higher education has really moved that way versus grades, right? We're kind of moving towards this competency. So what decided that that was the score? And so that kind of study was never done before. So that's kind of posed a problem when students are not passing because we don't have that reliability and validity. The great news is that with these revisions, we now have some of that. Next slide. So what did they do? We just magically have these new FWPs. Well, they appointed some task forces because that's what you do in late 2012. So there were 2 task groups that worked on this project, one in 2013 and one in 2015. The final task group of the Commission on Education completed revisions to the item content back in 2015. So if you're not familiar with how AOTA is set up, there is a body called the Commission on Education that is elected people that get together and create a bunch of position papers and guide where education is heading. That was a really poor description of what the Commission on Education is, but super quick. And so the final task group that revised the items also said, hey, AOTA, you need to get a consultant to complete statistical validation. We think this has face validity, but we need to know. So AOTA contracted with University of Illinois at Chicago, the Department of Occupational Therapy, to validate the revised FWPE items. And really the whole purpose of this was to yield stronger psychometric properties so that we could kind of stand on this tool and say, yes, this does measure current practice, and this does measure entry-level competence. Next slide. So what did they do? How did they even go about this? So the first phase was cognitive interviews. And so it was to really look at the validity of the items. Are we actually evaluating what we think we are? And so this was a series of focus groups, and some of you may have even participated in some of this with educators and fieldwork coordinators, and I believe there were some students involved in this as well. And so participants were asked to sort of think aloud regarding the new FWP items and the way it was worded. And a result of that was that they refined items even more, refine the rating scale and the format. And the other thing that really is big with this version is the alignment between the OT student and the OTA student to each other, as well as to current practice and current documents. So once they did all of that, then they engaged in some statistical validation. So they evaluated the evidence of validity in relation to, and this is kind of about statistical stuff, internal structure. So are all the items in these groupings actually related to each other? And do they actually measure what we think? Also looked at response processes. So how do we think about the rating scales? Fairness in testing and precision, which we really needed. They did some pilot testing for internal scale validity. And again, that happened, sometime. I remember they put a call out for that. So you may have even participated in that. They had fieldwork educators actually go through and score the current tool and score the new tool, and then look at how well those things lined up. They did a rush modeling to do some of that. And as a result of all of this, they really demonstrated evidence of the new tool's validity. And that has been, or is it's published in AJOT this fall, like hot off the presses. And so then also in this validation phase, they refined the FWPs a little bit more. And then they turned that back over to AOTA and said, okay, here are the refined items. Here's the validity, the reliability, all the statistics, because it's really AOTA's tool. That's who owns the tool. Next slide.
All right, so what changed on the actual evaluation itself? So the one that you will be utilizing either currently right now because you have a student that you're going to be using this new tool on, or in the next year. So what changed on the actual eval? So they really looked at minimizing the overlapping and redundant items. So we're gonna get into some specifics on that. And they aligned the OT and OTA version. So like Erica alluded to, how they really looked at making sure that the OT version and the OTA version aligned with each other, as well as being separate entities. They combined the communication and professional behaviors subsections, and then also updated terminology. So within the electronic documentation. So there are a few items on the fieldwork performance evaluation that are exactly the same, but the way that it's worded is the same. But what you'll note on these is there is examples, which is really nice. There are examples provided. So what may have been prior to just, a statement, which we're going to get into some examples, it might have been just a statement. Now you're able to look really objectively at specific examples when that statement is on there. So it may be measuring the same or similar constructs as before, but it's giving you examples of that. So also the alignment of that really looked at the updated terminology, looking at it towards the OTPF, so the OT practice framework, and really aligning it with the practice framework. And again, if you're thinking back, like Erica was talking about, in the 80s to 2002 to right now in 2020, where we just have this new practice framework, and kind of even being looked at again, of really aligning all of that together with the practice framework. All right, so if I'm looking at the number of items when I'm looking at the FWPE, if you look at 2002 and then 2020, if you're looking at this chart, and OT is first and then OTA is on the second line there. So if you look overall, there were 42 previously on OT, 25 on OTA. So OT, fieldwork performance eval, went down by 5. So there are 37 items now in the 2020 version. The OTA portion went up by 6. So there are 31 different questions and statements that you will be looking at if you are evaluating an OTA student. So previously, in 2002, 122 or higher was a passing score for an OT student, and now for the new version, it is a 111 or higher. The OTA students previously were a 70 or higher to pass, and now it's a 91 or higher to pass. So really just kind of looking at, and again, we're going to talk about this later, but you don't even have to add them up, which is, again, I think a huge benefit. So it is an automatically generated score. When you click on it, it's automatically generating if that person's passing or failing at the end.
Okay, so what do the actual items look like? So the fundamentals of practice are the first 3 items on the eval, and they're otherwise known as like the ethics items. They are still there. They were updated to language and aligned to each other. And you still have to receive a score of 3 on all 3 of these items. But we're going to talk about those when we talk about final scores and that kind of thing. Next slide. So the next section on the eval is basic tenets. And so these were updated and aligned to each other and to the framework. So in the OT tool, there were a couple things that were combined. There used to be 4 items in this section, and there's now only 3. And on the OTA side, it has 3 items as well, and there were major revisions to align to the OT student. So if you look through this, these are almost exactly the same. It's about articulating the values, beliefs, and distinct perspective of the occupational therapy profession to clients and other relevant parties clearly, confidently, and accurately. And so again, now the really nice thing is that's common between both practitioners. So it's got the same item. Articulating the value of occupation as a method and desired outcome of occupational therapy to clients and other relevants clearly, confidently, and accurately. And then the last one in this section articulates the role of occupational therapy practitioners to clients and other relevant parties clearly, confidently, and accurately. Next slide. So the next section in both FWPEs is screening and evaluation. And so what I tried to do on these slides was sort of line them up so that you can see where they are related to each other. So in the OT, there used to be 10 and there are now 9, and there are some major changes to the language. And then on the OTA, there are still 5 items, but there were major changes again to align. So we know that the OT has primary responsibility to articulate clear and logical rationale for the evaluation process based on client information, context, theories, frames of reference, and/or models. The next one is obtaining sufficient and necessary information from relevant sources throughout the evaluation process. And on the OTA side, we have obtained sufficient and necessary information about factors that support and hinder occupational performance from relevant sources throughout the evaluation process. So that's kind of how they support this one from the OT. We know that it's the OT's job to select relevant screening assessment tools based on whatever factors. We also know that it's the OT's responsibility to determine the client's occupational profile and their performance through interview and other eval methods. And then the OT's job is to evaluate and analyze client factors and contexts that support or hinder occupational performance. And I put C above relevant item because the OTAs can help figure out what some of those factors are that the OT is ultimately going to be analyzing. Next slide. So a responsibility on the OTA that we don't see an equivalent one in the OT is to establish service competency in assessment methods in accordance with setting procedures and applicable laws by administering assessments accurately and efficiently to ensure findings are valid, reliable, and timely. And so this talks about OTAs and how to administer standardized assessments. And then for the OT, to administer standardized and non-standardized assessments accurately and efficiently to ensure findings are valid and reliable. And so this kind of goes with the service competency because you'd be establishing that service competency with the OTA to ensure that the findings are valid and reliable. And then to have that OTA, they can administer delegated assessments using appropriate procedures and protocols. And then the OT has modifying evaluation procedures based on client factors and contexts. The OT takes the lead on interpreting evaluation results to determine clients' occupational performance strengths and challenges, but we know that the OTA can assist with interpreting that information in relation to the client's needs, factors, and performance. The OT will synthesize and document the results of the evaluation process clearly, accurately, and concisely, using systematic methods to record the client's occupational performance. And again, we know that the OTA has to accurately report the results clearly, accurately, and concisely, reflecting the occupational performance, whatever they've gathered during the evaluation, making sure they document that and report it clearly to the OT. Next slide. So then after that, we have intervention. And so this is another big chunk, right? So in OT, there were still 9 items with some major changes. And on the OTA side, they went from 6 up to 7 items with major changes. And on this slide, I tried to bold what the things are that are different between the two, because otherwise they're the same. So it's about articulating a clear and logical rationale for the intervention process. Interestingly, on the OT side, it spells out the evaluation context theories, frameworks, models, and evidence. And on the OT side, it just says other relevant considerations. Establishing that client-centered treatment plan. There's now both OT and OTA have something about use of evidence. So for the OT, using evidence from research and relevant resources to make informed intervention decisions. And then for the OTA, under supervision of and in cooperation with the OT, using professional literature to make informed intervention. And then as far as selecting the interventions, so that both of us do that, both OTs and OTAs, selecting client-centered and occupation-based interventions. And on the OT side, they add that the established goals that support targeted outcomes, because again, it's about the outcome measures and making sure we're reaching those final outcomes. And that word is not in the OTA. And noting here too that this one includes the consideration of all client-centered components, including psychosocial factors. So we're still pulling that psychosocial piece. Next slide. So the OT will have responsibility for choosing and modifying the intervention approach, remediate, right, adapt, modify. Both of us can modify task and environment to maximize clients' performance. We know that the OT has the overall responsibility for modifying the intervention plan and determining the need for continuing or discontinuation, but we know that OTAs can recommend that to the OT in a collaborative process. And then both of us have responsibilities to document actually the client's response to intervention effectiveness. Next slide. So this next section is management of occupational therapy services. This is completely new on the OTA side. They did not used to have this. So there are 4 all new items that align to OT. And in the OT students one, there were 5 and there's now 4. And so they are very similar. Demonstrating through practice or discussion, the ability to collaborate with and assign appropriate tasks. So for the OT student, that'll be to the OTA, the OT aide, or other, while still remaining responsibility for all aspects of the treatment. And for the OTA student, it's about assigning tasks to an OTA aide or others. The second one that is now for both is demoing through practice or discussion and understanding of costs and funding systems. The next one, demonstrating knowledge about the organization where they are working. And then meeting productivity standards or volume of work expected of occupational therapy students. And then the same for occupational therapy assistant students. So not necessarily saying employee productivity, but that which is expected of a student. Next slide. So there were some redundancy.
I'm going to interrupt you on that one, Erica. I think that's a big one that we hear from a lot of fieldwork educators of the productivity standard of, you know, is the student able to be at the same productivity that I am as a therapist, as an entry-level therapist? And that, you know, looking back at that one, I'm going to go back, you know, that's different than it was previously. And so it's stated differently also on the fieldwork performance eval than it was previously, that not only are they just meeting productivity standards, but what's expected of an OT student and an OTA student in that setting. So just kind of taking note of that, because I feel like we get asked that a lot as academic fieldwork coordinators.
Yeah, and I think that it allows us to really expand into a collaborative model and looking at allowing for some learning and volume of work instead of productivity, right? So again, there, as you've kind of seen through this, there's been a lot of redundancies. So on the last section, there used to be a professional behavior section separate from communication. And so they took this, and this is one of the biggest things too that they did, is they combined these 2 sections into one. So the OT went from 11 total items to 9, and the OTA went from 8 to 9. So again, there's better alignment of the items to each other, to language, and to practice. And on the next slide, we can see what those 9 items are that were left. And they are exactly the same for the OT and the OTA. So being able to communicate clearly and effectively, both verbally and non-verbally, kind of what Stacia was talking about earlier about, you know, do we have deer in the headlights? Do we have a really flat affect? Does it match what's coming out of their mouths? Producing clear and accurate documentation. And again, like Stacia was talking about, collaborating with the fieldwork educator to maximize the learning experience, right? Making sure that they're taking an active role in the reflection in their progress as students. Takes responsibility for attaining professional competence by seeking out learning opportunities and interactions with fieldwork educators and others. Responding constructively to feedback in a timely manner. So this is another one that we often get called in on, where the student gets angry about feedback or doesn't implement the feedback that they're getting. So this is an item here. Demonstrating effective time management, which we know is really important in those last few weeks for both OTA and OT. Managing relationships effectively through therapeutic use of self, and then adjusting their approach to meet the needs of clients and others. And then demonstrating respect for diversity factors of others. And that's it on that one. So the other kind of differences here on the final scoring, all of the items have to be scored to receive a pass on the FWPE for both OT and OTAS. That didn't used to be a rule, right? Like you could just accidentally not score something, and if they still had that final score, like that wasn't a thing. So you got to get a score on it. A sum of 111, like Stacia mentioned earlier, we required, and then a score of 3 or higher on the safety and ethics items. So the first one, adhering to AOTA's Code of Ethics, that hasn't really changed. Number 2, adhering to safety regulations and reporting or documenting incidents, and that has changed a little bit, that language. And then the last one that kind of struck us was the updated language on the third. So ensuring safety of the self and others during fieldwork by anticipating potentially unsafe situations and taking steps to prevent accidents. And so that is one that we will all, I think, appreciate, because often safety is like one of the first things we have to make sure happens, and sometimes can be kind of sticky, particularly in some acute or medically complex areas. And then the other thing that's new on this is that a score of 1 on any of the items at final is not allowed to receive a pass. Next slide. So similarly on the OTA, all items must be scored to receive a pass on the FWP. Seems like a silly little thing, but like that wasn't written anywhere. So they must have a total score of 91 or higher, which is a higher score now because there's more items. And then the first 3 items are the same as the one on the prior. So score of 3 or higher on items 1, 2, and 3. And then no scores of 1 are allowed at final. Those are fine at midterm, but not at final. And that's it.
All right, so looking at the rating scale, so Erica went through all of the actual wording of all of the items on the FWPE, and we're going to look at some of those and break them down a little bit further when we talk about some of the differences and when we look at the case studies. But really looking at the rating scale, so previously in the 2002 version, the criteria were exceed standards, meet standards, needs improvement, and unsatisfactory. And now what's italicized, so italicized what is different. And so it's exemplary, proficient, emerging, and unsatisfactory. And before we go on to the next slide, I'm going to share with you, let's see, I was going to share with you, but now the screen sharing thing is in the way. So let me find it up here. As soon as I go higher, it keeps scrolling down.
I know.
So can you see that rating score guide?
Yes.
Can you see that, Erica?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you, and we're going to share these links, these will be embedded throughout this presentation as well. So if you save the presentation when it's all said and done, and it will be in there on OOTA for you to view. But if you go to AOTA's website, Fieldwork Performance Eval, there's all kinds of really nice resources, and we have those at the end of the PowerPoint as well. But I'm just kind of scroll down, and this is their rating scale. And so they give you a nice kind of overview of the rating scale for AOTA for the Fieldwork Performance Eval here. So I just wanted to show you that really quick. All right, so the key changes are those in italics again. So in 2002 exceed standards, it was talking about on here when you're looking at that and really scoring that. And I've been through this hundreds of times, you know, talking about how to score this, I feel like with fieldwork educators, and it always comes back to what if I have not ever had students before. So when you're thinking about those brand new fieldwork educators, it's their first time. And here it says, this rating is rarely given and would represent the top 5% of all students you've ever supervised. Well, if you've never supervised a student, or if you've supervised one that was exceptional, and now you have like an okay student that's gonna pass, but yet, can you really give them a 4 because they're not the top 5%? Or maybe you had a student that failed previously, and now this student that you're thinking about is like God's gift to students, and are they really, right? So really it took kind of this subjective piece out in the new 2020 version. So when you're looking at exemplary performance, you're looking at, are they demonstrating satisfactory competence in specific skills consistently? So are you seeing consistency here? Not consistency that's poor, but satisfactory to what that particular setting is. can they demonstrate substantial the breadth and depth of the understanding of the application of that? So not only do they know, are they, you know, following you and doing the same types of things, so maybe they're doing an activity that's very similar to something you've just done and showed them, but why are they doing that activity? Thinking about the application of it. What are the knowledge and skills, and why are they doing what they're doing? So can they explain that? So that's a big difference here in the number 4, of not just kind of comparing to that top 5%, but in that setting and in this particular site, are they satisfactorily competent, and is it exemplary? So that's the number 4. Number 3 used to be that they're meeting the standard. So in the past, this score was infrequent at midterm, right? It would say infrequent at midterm. So it's consistent with entry-level practice here. So this rating's infrequent. Now 2020, it's saying that they're demonstrating satisfactory competence in specific skills. So if you look back at the number 4, it was kind of overall. Like, I'm seeing satisfactory competence in all of the skills, not just in specific. So 3 is their specific entities that you would score them as a 3. They have an adequate understanding. So again, they're not exemplary, but they understand it. They can apply their knowledge and skills. And maybe I'm still prompting them on some of those application pieces, but it's proficient. They're doing well. So number 2 here on the scoring criteria used to be needs improvement. It's now considered emerging practice. So in the past, when you would look at this, the performance is progressing, but they still need improvement in certain areas. It's stated on here that this is realistic for someone at midterm. However, again, this is a big question we would get as academic fieldwork coordinators. If it's consistent at midterm and they get 2s, in everything, they fail at midterm. So again, yes, it's realistic at midterm, but again, are there some things that are better than what's considered realistic at midterm? Are there some things that they need to, it might be worse? So now this is considered an emerging practice. So there's limited competence in a specific skill. So is there something in particular that they are maybe haven't had the opportunity to see or do yet, or they're just not quite there? You don't trust them in terms of like, oh, I couldn't allow them to be independent in this because they're not showing the competence that I need. So that would be a 2. So there might be inconsistencies. One day they're doing exceptional on this particular skill. The next day they're needing constant, maybe even verbal or visual reminders again. So is there inconsistency there? So limited in understanding or application of the fundamental knowledge and skills. So again, there's some gaps, there's some inaccuracies. That's where 2 would be. And then with the 1, it used to be unsatisfactory, and it's still unsatisfactory. So a 1 is performance that's below the standard required for entry-level practice. So this is where it typically used to be there's an area of concern, and it's still an area of concern. So this is where the student is failing to demonstrate competence. So they've had the opportunity to be competent in this particular area, but they have not shown it yet. So they could be performing in an inappropriate manner. So think about like communication, time management. Is their documentation skilled and looks great, and I don't have to make many changes, but oh my gosh, I'm staying 3 hours after because they're documenting that long, right? That is not satisfactory. So thinking about that, this particular skill would be something that you're still seeing gaps. There's significant gaps. There's inaccuracies there.
So the FWPE is no longer on paper. It is now all electronic. And that has its ups and downs. So one thing it does for you as the fieldwork educator is every school that uses the FWPE will use the same database called FormStack. And I know like we had ours initially built in eValue, and now we're on Exact, and some people use Core, and there's like 4 or 5 different programs out there. So it'll help you guys in that it's only on one database, one format. It's also going to help us collect additional information, additional statistical scores to help determine what should cutoff scores continue to be at. And then collecting this common data could also help us determine midterm scores, because with the way it is right now, there was not enough information to establish what a midterm score should be. So no longer do we have this idea of they have to have a 70 to pass midterm. Or was it 90? I think it was 90. I'm getting my OTA days confused. So it has to be, we don't have that anymore. So some schools, you want to check in with the school. Some schools might have a midterm score they'd like their students to achieve. Others will not. Usually the midterm score is a nice way for us as coordinators to kind of know how things are going, along with our midterm site visit, which we can't do right now, but phone calls, Zoom sessions. We'd love to come see you. It's way more fun than sitting in our own little offices. So you'll just have to kind of keep in touch with the fieldwork coordinator from the school about what kind of information they want at midterm to know how things are going. But again, by using this common electronic format across the nation, we can collect this data nationally to really continue to strengthen and revise the reliability and validity, which means we might not have to go through such a major revision in the future. Physical therapy, we always compare ourselves to them, already has theirs on a database. And I think that's really helped with their validity and reliability of their tool. Next slide. So the database is called FormStack, and that is who has built this evaluation. It is HIPAA and Fwpe compliant and does have a federally compliant secure data storage. So, all the students' information, your information, scores will all be kept securely. The nice thing is that schools can customize additional forms. The system will automatically send out certificates of supervision for hours. It can report aggregate data for us on the school side, what was our average score, all that kind of thing, and generate reports for accreditation because we spent hours trying to pull things together for accreditation. So you may be thinking, how is this different than EXAT, eValue, Core, whatever else that some places are using? EXAT and eValue will probably continue to be used by individual schools because we often use that to manage the contracts. We use that to manage slot reservations and assignments. We use it to manage student information. And then all those forms Stacia was talking about at the beginning, the fieldwork data form, the weekly timelines for each individual site, site-specific objectives, which we probably will have to revise for the new FWPE. There's so much information that we're managing on the school side that we're required to for accreditation that students actually find quite useful. So you'll probably continue to see schools use some sort of database. The good thing about FormStack is you do not need a login. So you don't have to remember what is my password for this. Everything will come via a link in an email. So that will be sent to you initially by the fieldwork coordinator from the school. It will become even more important for the school's fieldwork coordinator to know who the educator, the actual educator is before the start of the rotation. And there's two reasons for this. One, accreditation is now requiring us to check licenses of educators to make sure they have a year of clinical practice and make sure they have a valid license. So that's really hard for us to do if we don't know who the educator is. And then also getting FormStack all set up for you to have these emails automatically sent. If we can get all that done on the front end, it'll make the rotation that much smoother for us. Next slide.
All right, so the layout, we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of the FWPE and what that's going to look like. So when you do get an email, you're aware of what's coming to you, what that looks like, what you have to do on your end. So the layout of the new fieldwork performance eval is very similar. So when you get it, it is only electronic. So those of you that really like to either handwrite it or handwrite it and then transfer it to electronic database, that is no longer a possibility. So if you are working with a school using the fieldwork performance eval, which I'm assuming you are, and that's why you're here, it is only available electronic. It is no longer even being sold or allowed to be used as paper form, mainly because it is no longer it was never really valid or reliable. So now that we have a reliable, valid tool, that is the only one that is allowed to be used. So just FYI, it's only electronic. So the format looks very similar. There's a cover page, there's direction scoring, there's the specific items that Erica was going through. There's an overall summary page. There's the references, and again, the terminology piece where you're really looking at the OT practice framework with the terminology. But really, it's just click, 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 right? You're just clicking through each one of these, and you're able to type in each of these. Where you could type in it previously is where you can type in it again for at like midterm and the final of this is how the student is doing. So I'm going to take you through, it's about a 5.5-minute training video of what this looks like. So those of you that are academic fieldwork coordinators, bear with us. You may have seen this already when you did the Neil webinar. And so we just wanted to make sure that everyone was kind of on the same page before we move ahead and I show you specifics. So we're going to watch this video, and it really kind of breaks down specifically what you do as a fieldwork educator when you get that email. So Erica, let me know that you can see this running.
I can't hear it. Did you share your computer sound?
Okay. Let me go up to that. Thank you for the reminder. Let me start it over. See if you guys can hear it now. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it when it starts, Erica.
Performance evaluation, you'll receive an email in your inbox from noreply@fwpe.com. Choose the Getting Started option, and from here, this will take you into the portal for the fieldwork performance evaluation for the midterm. Click on Open Form. This first page will be a list of directions for rating the student's performance. Please read through this thoroughly so that you have an understanding of completing the performance evaluation. Then click Next, and once you do, you'll be taken to this page, which I've pre-filled. You'll need to choose that you are the fieldwork educator, complete the student's information as well as your information, and more information down here. If there happens to be another fieldwork educator working with the student, you'll choose this option that says yes or no. And then down here for fieldwork setting, you'll choose some selections from the bottom. Choose Next. For the sake of this example, I'm just going to give the student all 4, so exemplary performance. And as you can see, you have optional comment fields if you'd like to make additional comments. You'll also notice that if you make any errors, you have the option at the bottom of each page to go to the previous page or previous pages just by clicking that previous button down here at the bottom, which you'll see right here. As I'm grading the student, we're doing calculations behind the scenes, so you won't have to worry about tabulating these or keeping track of them. Another option that you have is to save and resume this evaluation. If you want to do that, simply choose Save and Resume Later at the bottom of the page. What we'll do is we will email you a link of the form and save the data that you've completed and place you into the page where you left off. So at the bottom, you'll also see the option for the progress indicator. So we can see as we are progressing along in this evaluation, at this point we should be almost done. And on this last page for the midterm, what you'll see is the total score of 148 here. Because it's the midterm, we don't have a pass or fail. We just give you the total score. At the bottom here, you have the option to add comments. You can choose if the student was informed of this review, and then sign as the fieldwork educator and click on Submit My Evaluation. Once this is done, in your inbox, you'll receive a PDF attachment of the evaluation. So if I click here, you'll see here's the attachment that has all of the answers that I've input on the form itself. Additionally, they'll have a link for the final evaluation. We'll also send you a reminder email prior to the final so that you can reference that and be taken to the final evaluation. For the sake of this example, I'm not going to go through the entire final examination or final evaluation, but I do want to show you a few key features here. So I can access the final by clicking this link. Again, the first page is very similar to the midterm. Next page, you will again have to fill out a few sections of this. And so I'm just going to choose a few of these options here at random. Just say that this is the final. So we're going September through mid-October, 6 weeks, and go to the next page. And the difference here is that you'll actually see that we've pre-populated the data from the midterm evaluation along this right side. So you'll be able to see what you scored the student on the midterm on the right side. And then of course, your new scoring will be along the left. So just as we did within the midterm, for the sake of this example, I'm just giving the student all fours. Again, I can look to the right and see what score the student received on each of these sections from the midterm. As I'm doing this, one thing to note is that if the student is scored less than standard on anything regarding safety or the code of ethics, we will automatically display an error message or a warning message, letting you know that if it is the final and the student scored lower than the standard, then that they would automatically fail. Again, you have the chance to make those corrections. If you're on that page, you can simply just choose another option. If you've gone beyond that page, you can choose previous and get back to that section there. As you can see, we are almost finished with this evaluation, just a few more pages here. And just as we did in the midterm, this is calculating all of the scoring as I'm going throughout this evaluation here. Now, this is what's different from the midterm. So we're on the final page, and again, we've calculated the final score, but we've also added this additional field for pass or fail. In this case, the student has passed based on the performance scores above here. So just as I did with the midterm, I can add comments. I can specify if the student was informed of the review and sign as the fieldwork educator. Once I click on submit my evaluation, just as with the midterm, I'll receive an email in my inbox with an attachment of my performance evaluation. This time, this is the final evaluation, has all of the details from the final. Additionally, you'll receive, as the fieldwork educator, the student's certificate. So once I click on this, you'll see this will populate with information from the form itself or from the certificate. And as an attachment is the final AOTA certificate for the program. So that's the entire process going through the student evaluation for both the midterm and the final. Again, the final is going to show the pass or fail option, but in either case, you will receive from FormStack Documents a separate email with the student's final certificate.
Okay, so we're going to kind of go through a couple of those, just key highlights on there. So knowing that it automatically calculates, again, like I mentioned before, which is wonderful news for some of you that don't have to pull out the calculator or add it all up at the end and just double check, did my student really pass? Another key highlight is that it does save and resume. So if you want to come back to it later at a later date, you don't necessarily need to save it into your own PDF file. You don't have to save it into, you know, your Word document on your own laptop, which some hospitals it's a little tricky because your hospital system, I came across this several times every semester where the hospital doesn't necessarily want you to kind of put your electronic signature out there. And so it's kind of quite a process. This is a little bit different in that it automatically will save and resume, and it sends you the email link to come back to at a later date. So just making sure again that you do receive the email link and that it's not going to spam or junk. And that's something that I'm not aware of if it does yet, because we haven't used this yet. And so I haven't heard from any other fieldwork coordinators out there that that has been happening, but we are pretty active. Eric and I both are on the listserv, so we haven't heard that yet. The previous and next option, so if it is something that you're like, oh, you know, maybe I should have scored them this way, you can go back and forth in the document and you can go back and forth even if you save to resume later. So you can go back. Once you have, however, signed the document and submitted the document, you are not able to go back. So just being aware of that. So once you complete the midterm, you then do receive a PDF, just like it showed in your training video, of the email with the completed midterm and then a new link for the final. So again, just being aware that this will be emailed to you, and it does come through FormStack. It doesn't necessarily come from, you know, Gailey S at Xavier. It's coming from a FormStack email. So this, on the PowerPoint, I just kind of highlighted some of those things that I was talking about in the video. So when you do access this PowerPoint, you'll have kind of an idea. So you do not need your own password to access FormStack. You don't need to go to FormStack and find this. It's something that originally is coming from the Academic Fieldwork Coordinator. So the Academic Fieldwork Coordinator, like Erica was mentioning before, it's very important for us to know who is that specific fieldwork educator that we need to send this to, so that person can complete it at midterm and final. So it will be included in the email. Again, you just click on get started. Like I was saying before, it's just a lot of clicks. Click on get started, click the that you are the fieldwork educator. The students do have access to completing their own. So like I was talking about earlier, that when a self-assessment can be really helpful to compare and contrast. So students do have access to complete this as a student, and then you can compare those. And then you're going to click on open form to really kind of start the process. You're going to just follow those directions. All the scores are calculated automatically. You do have a chance to review everything before you get the total score and then submit. But just again, noting, like Erica had talked about previously, the midterm evaluation does not say pass or fail, and it also does not include a pass or fail number. So that does not come from AOTA or on FormStack, but some universities are saying we're looking at this number to determine, does the student is the student on the road to passing, or is this a student of concern? And so really for us, we haven't decided yet if we're looking at a specific number or if it's more, just talking to you at midterm, because that's what we do anyway at Xavier. I'm either coming to you, or if you're in within 8 hours, I'm driving to you, except it's COVID time, so I'm Zooming you. So for those of you that I'm meeting with one-on-one or Zoom or on a phone call, it's just a simple conversation at that point of, is this student continuing to progress and seeing where you want them to be, or is the student getting significant ones and twos? And that's an area of concern. And so again, it might look different for different universities there with the midterm score. Once you have completed the midterm eval, you receive the email. That's the one that's going to allow you to then access for the final. However, just to note that only the primary fieldwork educator listed on the form will receive the email. So there's some kind of work being done behind the scenes of trying to figure it out with making sure that all the fieldwork educators that are listed on there are able to access and are able to place input for the midterm and the final. So making sure that if, say somewhere like at week 3, someone goes on maternity leave and now there's a second one, making sure that at midterm that both of those fieldwork educators are placing their names, and that I, as an academic fieldwork coordinator, know that, of course, I can be able to send you this new link coming from FormStack. The other piece to know is if you are not located on that form as a fieldwork educator, you do not receive a continuing education certificate, because again, it's formulated and populated through FormStack, and AOTA is kind of sending those out then through FormStack. So making sure that everyone that has been a part of this student, so say you're sharing, or there's a collaborative process, 2 fieldwork educators, or you had to switch because of a maternity leave, or something, there's all kinds of stuff that happens, right? Or COVID happens and you have to come back 7 weeks later, who knows? So just making sure that whoever's giving input and a part of the learning process for that student and providing input as a full-time fieldwork educator or a shared fieldwork educator, that you are both on there so you can receive that continuing education. The confirmation email will include the link then for the final evaluation. And then when you complete the final evaluation, you do receive an email reminder. So if you're like, oh my gosh, this has been, 5 weeks ago. Where did I put that email? Who is this even from? Where is this student from? Trying to just, the head of an OT and an OTA on a daily basis, right? You're pulled a million different ways. You do receive an email reminder. And again, just making note of, if you need to reach out to us as academic fieldwork coordinators, at this point, I don't know how to find that email for you because I haven't done this yet, but I'm sure that we can figure it out by the time that, which again is really nice that we're not the new guinea pigs in my mind. Us at Xavier and at Ohio State, we're not starting it till January. So hopefully that the kinks will be kind of worked out and we can figure that out. And this was talked about in the video too, the warning message. So if you do place a score of 1 on the ethics and safety, so those first 3 that we were talking about earlier, if they go below 3, so if there's a 1 or 2, there's a warning message that's going to alert you of like, oh, you didn't score this, or there's a piece missing, or are you sure the student's really not competent in safety and ethics? So it's going to kind of alert you. And then the final evaluation will include the pass-fail based on those scores. So if all of a sudden you're like, oh, I wonder why that student says fail, and you see this warning sign, it might be because of one of those things. At the very end, once you do sign that, and another thing to note, which after watching this video, like I feel like 12 times, I've never picked up on, but this is another change. The student does not have to sign the form. So the student is not required to sign the fieldwork performance eval like they were in the past. You simply check mark the box that you've reviewed it with them. So again, hopefully that you are really doing that and not just submitting it, and that the student is aware. And again, it's really nice that the student can complete that prior and have that conversation and be a part of the learning process there too. But a separate email then is confirmed through you that it has been submitted. It gives you a copy of the entire PDF to save for yourself. And then also a separate email with the certificate is emailed to you immediately upon submission, which is again, really nice that you're not having to kind of get that from the school or access that from Exact once that's submitted. And so all of that kind of comes directly to you. It is sent to the primary fieldwork educator's address initially, and then also this is something to note. Initially, it was only sent to primary. I have heard from those fieldwork educators that have submitted at this point that it is coming to the secondary as well, which is nice because you were a part of the process also. So you should be getting a continuing ed certificate. So just making sure you're noting, midterm passing grade. But again, just talking to your university about that. So just some more information for you. Reminder emails, if less than 3 on the first 3 items, you get an error. Making sure that it does say pass or fail, making sure that you sign it, all the things that you were doing before anyway. All right, so some sample items on here, and I wanted to show you. So first we're gonna go through the OT, and these are the sample items that Erica showed you prior, but some of the things I really wanted to note about the examples, like I was talking about earlier. So on here, this is the occupational therapy student form. And so I'm gonna kind of scroll down here just so you can see it. So again, all of these links are gonna be available to you. They're at the end of the PowerPoint also as a resource, but just so you can see, this is the actual fieldwork for performance evaluation just on AOTA paperwork instead of FormStack. Electronically. So here are the items on here, the 37 items for the OT student, and we're going to go through the OT student first and then the OTA. And I really just kind of noted, a couple items on here that I wanted to talk about. So we're not going through all 37, just so you're aware. So number 8 on here, and if you look on that form that I just shown you, there are significant changes like Erica had talked about, and then there are some that are just exactly the same. So some that are similar are this like number 8, where it talks about obtain sufficient and necessary information from relevant sources through the eval process. So if you're comparing it to 2002, this is number 12 on 2002. However, it now has specific examples below it, not embedded in it. So is the student looking at the record chart review? Are they talking to the clients? Are they getting sufficient information from family, caregivers, service providers? So it's giving you those examples. And so if you look then on number 9, about selecting screening and assessment tools, again, it's providing examples. So when you're looking at that and thinking, oh, I don't know, do they get relevant screening and assessment tools? Are they doing that? It's really kind of breaking it down for you in the examples there of looking at those client priorities, funding sources, cultural relevance, those types of things. So it's giving you kind of just a clue in as to what to look for. I think that'll be really helpful for especially newer fieldwork educators of really looking at what am I needing to see here to make sure that the student is competent and either exemplary or proficient. So determining the client's occupational profile, occupational performance through interview and other appropriate evaluation methods. This is similar to the 2002 number 10 as well, but those that are italicized and underlined are brand new. So it's added into, and then it breaks it down and gives you the terminology for both of those. So again, what is an occupational profile? What am I needing to look at? And what is the occupational performance? So it gives you those examples and breaks it down for the student to look at. Number 11, evaluating and analyzing the client factors. It's telling you what is a client factor and what are the contexts. So again, you're not having to really try to figure that out. It's all there for you to look at and providing examples of it. Number 25, all of those in italics and underlined again are brand new. So it's similar to the number 27, but adding or others to whom responsibilities might be assigned while remaining responsible for all aspects of treatment. So things like paraprofessional, the nurse, the aide, the nurse's aide, the volunteers. So are they able to demonstrate through practice and discussion with all of these people in collaboration? And then number 26, demonstrates through practice or discussion, understanding of costs and funding. So previously when it would say demonstrates an understanding, that's what would often be a little bit confusing or even a little bit subjective of what does that really mean? So it's really just either through practice or discussion. So if you're not able to practice cost and funding systems in your setting, are they able to discuss and understand it with you? So can that student discuss it with you? Things like the federal, state, third party, private payers. So again, it's providing examples there and it's added into the text. So the OTA piece, I'm going to show that one to you now. Again, on the OTA Fieldwork Performance Eval website, it provides all of these. And if you look, so for example, like number 9, it's giving you those examples. So it's showing you all of these that are on there and how it increased to 31 items. So number 3, and Erica referenced this before, number 3 was a big change and a major change in the 2002 version to 2020 version. So it ensures the safety of self and others during all fieldwork related activities by anticipating the potentially unsafe. So all of that is underlined in italics again is brand new. So that anticipation piece is all new, ensuring the safety of yourself and others. So are they able to scan the environment? Am I safe? What do I need to do to make sure that the client's safe, not just myself, but the client as well? So the safety of self is all brand new in there. So again, thinking about body mechanics, equipment, precautions, contraindications, just looking at the community. Administering delegated assessments. So again, examples are non-standardized and standardized interviews. Number 10, assist with interpreting information in relation to the client's needs. It's giving you examples there. And then the collaboration with the fieldwork educator to maximize the learning. So again, examples are they initiating communication with you as a fieldwork educator, or are they just kind of listening to you and doing what you say? Are they asking you for feedback, or again, are they just receiving it? So it's giving you some good examples. All right, so we're gonna take, we're actually only gonna do one of the case scenarios and discussions because I wanna make sure we have time for any of the questions. So we're gonna read a case scenario together. So take the time to read it and then be looking at, like just be thinking, I don't know that we're gonna have time to score the whole thing, but just be thinking, what's the next step? What were some humongous red flags for you in this? Where do you think that fits into the fieldwork performance eval? And who is ultimately responsible then when it comes down to it? So go ahead and read this case scenario, and then we're gonna kind of discuss through it. So I'll just give you a couple minutes. All right, so the midterm meeting with your student is next week. So thinking about what areas are of most concern, what scores would be indicated, who is responsible, like what's a red flag? And I know we had said the chat still an option? I'm looking. Erica, do you see the chat on your end?
Yes, I do see it, but I'm not sure if they can give it to all attendees or not. They can send it to us.
Okay, so Erica, you and I will have a discussion.
Okay.
So, all right, so red flags, Erica, what do you see as a red flag?
Well, so safety of the client, right? Definitely the red burn. That's the first one.
Right, red burn. Another kind of red flag that sticks out to me is that the student has appeared overly confident in many areas, so they really didn't want to appear incompetent, but kind of questioning how many times has this really happened, right? Has the student done this previously? Were they just not, lying by omission on any other
think about ethics?
Mm-hmm.
No,
so thinking about ethics here. Mm-hmm. Right. So initially thinking about the fieldwork performance I'm immediately thinking about ethics, right? Okay, if you've never really done this before and you had said, oh, well, I learned PAMs, but what did that really entail? Okay, so the ethical component of that, safety, right? Safety of client, being able to even think clinically through safety of self and others. So all of that on there.
Yeah. And so then also some of the professional communication types of things, right? So are they participating in the supervisory process? Are they self-reflecting? Are they implementing the feedback that you're giving, right? So I see this as, obviously some other things, but the ethics things, and then sometimes down in that professional communication area.
Yep, professional behavior communication piece. And then next step is, of course, talking with the student, right? And figuring out, but truthfully, next step is probably dealing with the client that has the red burn. But in terms of the student, next steps with the client, of making sure in terms of like, is this going to ever happen again, right? And having a discussion with why that's not safe, what has happened, but also, ultimate responsibility lies on you as the therapist, right? So this is your student under your license that student is signing and providing documentation and seeing clients. So making sure that you're the one that is ultimately responsible for that student. So making sure that the student is competent and hopefully not having ethical and safety concerns. But in the PowerPoint, there's a couple of these for you to kind of go through, which we're not have time today. But just kind of recapping all of this before we do the answer some of the Q&As. Just tips for you at fieldwork, for fieldwork educators at midterm and final, whether you're a fieldwork educator by yourself or you're doing a collaborative model, making sure that you are meeting with that student for midterm, reviewing that, and of course, keeping that communication open at all times so that that student feels confident to talk to you and comfortable to talk to you about areas of concern, and that communication goes both ways, that you feel confident and comfortable talking to the student about those areas of concern. And then again, meeting with us as academic fieldwork coordinators, making sure that we're aware of not just concerns, but awesome things as well. I love to hear that this student is doing amazing. I could see them in the setting someday. That's always just really nice to hear as a fieldwork coordinator. And then just recaps of the benefits of this. So it's easy online access for you, hopefully. That's what is the hope. It is a validated assessment. It has automated scoring and documentation. It's saved and emailed you in a PDF that you can have and save. It generates a continuing education certificate. And then for us on our end, what I'm most excited about is this aggregate data, and that I can see over time, are Xavier students lacking in a particular focus area, or are they excelling in another area? Are all our students getting 4s in this and 2s in some of these? What do we really need to tweak in our curriculum to really make sure that all students are getting and doing exceptionally well in all of those areas? But right now, it's just, pulling it out one by one and trying to do it on our own. These are the resources. So for all of you that I talked about before of that fieldwork performance evaluation for OT and OTA, looking at those step-by-step, what do you need to do? It also takes you to the training video. It also shows you that rating scale. So all of this is in here, but it's also, if you go to the AOTA website and just click in Fieldwork Performance Eval, you're going to see all of that, and it's really helpful information for you. This is something that I'm planning to show all of my fieldwork educators so that hopefully they are able and knowledgeable to be able to do this with their student and don't feel incompetent or scared of like, oh, this is a new tool, you know, and that hopefully they just feel we're available to you. So if you have questions as you go throughout, and then some just references on there. So do we want to go ahead and take a couple questions, or I think there's like 5 questions.
Yeah. So someone asked about the slides available in the handouts. We can, if we didn't put the slides in there, we can. Yeah.
Yes, they will be in there.
What special? Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
We're both reading it. What special considerations or recommendations do you have for community-based or consultative practice? We often have inconsistent caseloads and do a variety of non-traditional interventions. Evaluations can be more challenging to complete in these settings. I think this is a great question, and we are starting to see more and more people using community-based and consultative practice in non-traditional level 2 fieldwork settings. And I think it's about scaling it back and thinking about what is entry level. And then I think the new OTPF has a lot of really great information about population health and how you're really kind of treating them almost at that population health level. Stacia, do you have anything else to ask?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so when we talk to students about community-based or non-traditional population health kind of thing, kind of different settings, it might not be a standardized evaluation tool that you're using, but it could be a non-standardized, it could be clinical observation. So is the student able to demonstrate the competencies in what you're using at that particular setting? So it doesn't necessarily need, you don't need to go out and purchase a standardized eval because your student needs to have that on the fieldwork performance eval. It could be something non-standardized. It could be evaluation that you've created at that site. There are some hospitals that have more like screening and eval tools that they've created there. And so it's really, is that student competent in those areas of practice that you are utilizing at that particular setting? Let's see, I tend to be stingy with my 4s. Ooh, I'm a stingy 4 also. Where other OTs appear to be more liberal. How do we explain this to a student? I think it kind of comes from the university as well. So of just talking to students about what is a pass and what is a fail. And, it's no different on the NBCOT exam. What is a pass? What is a fail? That as a student, no one knows your score but you and that fieldwork educator, and no one knows what you've learned unless, and so in terms of like the score itself, you're still passing at a particular score. A pass is a pass, whether you pass by 1 or you pass by 50, a pass is a passing score. And so it's really kind of how skilled and how much you've learned. And I talk to students all the time of like, this one fieldwork educator in this setting might score, you might get all 4s. And what's that telling you? That should probably tell you like, I'm amazing and I should work there someday and be a fieldwork educator there, versus someone else who's like, this is what you still need to practice and do well on. And so it kind of depends also on the setting, not just the fieldwork educator. Of some settings are more challenging than other settings. But
I think the other thing too to remember is that FWPE is not meant to measure above entry-level competence. It is just meant to measure entry-level competence. And now that we have a different rating scale and different explanations, I think that will help that whole evening out of 3s and 4s too.
I do too, because it's not comparative to other students at this point, and I think that's going to be a hard transition for a lot of fieldwork educators that have used this for 20 years, right? That you're not supposed to necessarily have the mindset of like, oh, I'm comparing you to the student I just had. Are they in the top 5%? And so really looking at what are the skills that that student is doing at this time, and are they skilled in that? Maximum number of fieldwork educators who can evaluate. Ooh, I believe 3.
That's my thought too.
Remember that also? I think it is 3. How does that work with the scores? So everyone has this, you don't share, everyone doesn't complete a different fieldwork performance evaluation. You have one link. So it really needs to come from communication with each other, and one person is either filling it out at that one particular time, or you're all meeting via Zoom or a phone call and chatting it through for midterm or the final of like, this is where we agree to score this one student on. So if somebody's giving a 2 and someone's giving a 3 or 4, you know, talking about that ahead of time of this is really where we need to come to, because not everyone's filling it out separately. It is only one link and one person's completing.
And I think that's why, you know, you can print out the PDF of it from AOTA to kind of sit and think about, so that you guys can sit down and fill it out together.
Okay, it is 7:30, so just FYI, if you need to hop off, that's okay. We're going to go through the next couple questions real quick. Is the electronic fieldwork performance eval going to be able to be filled out by an OT and OTA collaboratively? Can you print out the initial instructions to read on your own time, not in front of the computer screen? Yes, you can print them out ahead of time in terms of, I think when you download it, so when you go to the link, you can print it out like a screenshot printing, but then you still have to save and return. Yeah. So it's not available like elsewhere out in the world that you can print it out.
And I think the question about OT, OTA collaboratively, so just like Seisha was talking about earlier, if there's multiple fieldwork educators, you know, making sure you're talking about that score and then entering it. If it's an OT student, technically in Ohio, the OTA cannot supervise the OT student. It has to be done by that OT, but that doesn't mean that you can't gather information from that OTA, just like you would from any other professional. They're just not technically the supervisor.
And if it's an OTA student,
then
absolutely, yeah. OT and OTA collaborate. Yes, absolutely. And if they both are providing, if they are both providing the, as a fieldwork educator, then they would both be getting a continuing education certificate. But if it's simply the OTA providing, then the OTA is completing and can get input from OT. Yeah. So similar to in the past.
Yeah.
And the last question, in the fieldwork performance eval, it provides an area to make additional comments, which is every single question now, FYI, not each section. Do I have to fill all those in? Absolutely not. I know we all like feedback, especially students. They love your feedback, but I feel like during the whole process, you're constantly providing feedback. Yes. So no, you do not need to fill every single one of those sections in. I would provide, especially if there's an area of concern. Why is there an area of concern? Don't just put like the 1 or 2 and then like leave it blank and say, I'm going to talk to the student, because us as academic fieldwork coordinators, we of course want to know that as well. But be putting that in there. Or if it's just exceptional and you're like, oh, you're exemplary in this, that's nice to see as well for a student to especially go back on, and for yourself to remember at midterm to final, why in the world did I score this student as a 2 6 weeks ago? Yeah. And so no, it's not required to fill it all out. Absolutely not.
I think if you have a little bit on each section, but not necessarily each item, I think you're good.
Right. Yeah. But thank you guys. And if you guys have any further questions or anything, feel free to reach out to Erica and I. This will be available on OTA, and then all of those handouts as well that we referenced and these resources are going to be available on there too.
Thank you, Stacia and Erica. I want to thank everybody for attending this presentation tonight as a part of our Virtually Unstoppable conference. Alicia posted a link in the chat for you to follow to complete a short survey. There's a few questions to answer about tonight's presentation, and then that'll allow you to obtain your certificate through Certify-em. Make sure that your email is correct on the survey to ensure your certificate gets to you. Also check your spam. We will leave the webinar open for 10 minutes to ensure everyone has had a chance to get on the link and get their certificate. We hope you will join us for future Virtually Unstoppable sessions throughout the month. Thank you again. Have a good night, guys.
Thank you, everybody. And I see one more question. I'm going to answer it for that person.
Yeah, I was typing in there too. So go
ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Do you want to answer it, Erica?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think that person could provide input to the midterm eval. What if the OTR just jumps in and out of the fieldwork and wants to be part of? I think it's okay for them to be part of what, comments. But if they're not the direct supervisor, they shouldn't be primarily responsible for scores on that evaluation. And it sounds like in this instance, they would not really get continuing education credit if they're not providing a substantial portion of the education of the student. So I have split things up for educators, but it really needs to be a consistent thing. Would you agree?
I would agree. Jumping in and out doesn't seem like a consistent fieldwork educator. So when I think of jumping in and out, it's like, oh, I need help with this, or I'm struggling, or there's, the student is an area of concern in this. Could you like provide feedback or maybe be with the student for the day, versus if they're consistently with them, like on Mondays and Tuesdays, and you're sharing them and collaborating together on Mondays and Tuesdays, and maybe they're with you Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's different than if they're just jumping in and kind of providing input in every now and then, or kind of, they've seen the student with you maybe a couple times and they're providing feedback. But yeah, if they're consistently with the student, being able to evaluate them, then I would say absolutely. But if it's someone that's just jumping in and out, then no.
Agreed. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, guys. You guys have a good evening and a great rest of the week, and stay COVID free, please. Stay safe.